Hi everyone. So welcome to this on-demand session on modern methods of construction and procurement in the current environment. My name's Trina and I'm Project Director of Building Better. Building Better is an alliance of housing associations collaborating and aggregating our development pipelines to deliver the very highest quality homes using MMC. And this session is about how our sector can approach procuring homes in this way, and we'll aim to draw out some really practical takeaways for organisations considering going down this route. Our speakers are Jeff Endean, who is Director at Cast Consulting, and Robert Peck, who is Procurement Services Director at Procurement for Housing. Jeff's going to begin the session with a quick overview of MMC, the effect COVID-19 has had on construction, and how the market is likely to evolve. Rob will then cover the implications for social housing providers specifically, feedback from manufacturers, and PFH's procurement approach to a very different way of developing in what is an uncertain environment. There will be a Q&A at the end, but because the session is on demand, we can't take live questions. So if you do have any, please send them on to michelle.tellner at housing.org.uk, and we'll make sure to answer and share them in the post-event communications. We'll also put up Michelle's address at the end on a slide after the presentation. So with that, I will now hand over to Jeff, please.
Thank you, Trina. As you say, so I'm a director at Cast, where I specialise in our work on strategic advisory in construction, and in that with a particular focus on modern methods of construction. I work with housing associations, contractors, developers, policymakers to try to support the growth of MMC and unpick some of the problems to do with it, and I think I'd like to just try and bring some of those insights into this presentation today. And in particular, I'd like to cover three specific areas. First, I'd just like to recap on what we mean by MMC, and in doing that, talk about some of the generic advantages that MMC brings and some of the challenges that are still there in using MMC today. I think these things are all relevant for any discussion, and I think by bringing these things out now, it will help to set up the more detailed the material that Robert will bring you later in the presentation. I'd also like to touch on where the MMC sector is going, how big it might get, what the drivers for that are, and I think those include factors like regulation. COVID is a major factor in starting to drive MMC today, and investment, and give a sense of what that might mean, and therefore why MMC is so important in everyone's thinking, I think, in the future. And then finally, what I'd like to do to try and make it a bit more real in terms of asset management is pick out three specific ways that I think everything that I've talked about beforehand relates to asset management and long-term asset owners, and can bring benefits to whole life costing and long-term viability of assets. So first, what is MMC? On the screen here, I have a whole load of names that you would have heard, no doubt, over the years. Some of them go back quite a long way, so prefabrication's been around for a very long time. But effectively, they all mean exactly the same thing. They're all different variations on a theme of houses or homes that are partly or entirely pre-manufactured in some way and assembled on site rather than being entirely constructed on site. I think in some ways, actually, the use of this interchangeable terminology has not been helpful, and for that reason, in the past year or so, MHCLG has brought out this definition framework to help people to understand exactly what is meant by MMC. This is supposed to be a future-proofed definition framework, so this is also about where MMC might go to in the future. What you can see here is that there's 7 categories, and across these 7 categories, you have various extents of pre-manufacture. The thing that connects all of them is that there is an element of pre-manufacture, that something happens away from site that is assembled on site. Category 1 being the element that has the most pre-manufacture, through to category 7, which is effectively improvements that happen on sites that can happen on any sites. I won't labour these because this is something that you can go and find online. If you Google MMC definition framework, this is the first response that will come up, so it's easy enough to find. But I do think it's important to set out exactly what we mean by MMC. So it runs from category 1, which is what everyone kind of thinks of as MMC, I think, to modular housing units that are built entirely in factories and assembled on site, effectively stacked together and connected on site. Category 2 is a two-dimensional version of the same thing, and you'll see this on traditional builds as well as what you might consider to be MMC builds, so framing solutions like steel or timber, SIPS panels, those sorts of things. Category 3 are large format components, and actually been around for a long time, so these could be roof trusses and staircases built off site. And it runs through to Category 7, where actually I think there's interesting parts of Category 7 that relate particularly to asset management. So in Category 7 is where you'll find things like process improvements on site, the use of BIM. We're seeing more digital tools coming through now, so technical tools that enable on-site delivery to be better managed and categorized and catalogued. So actually, there's a whole range of things that are happening here, and it's not just about modular, I think is the main point I wanted to get out of showing these. Using that as a backdrop, and picking up the fact that actually the thing that connects all of these things, all of these different types of manufacture, is that they are to some extent built off-site, and you get with that the benefits of factory manufacture, better precision and better quality of products. It's worth touching on just some of the main benefits. Now, you'll have access to all of this as a recording, so I'm not going to pick out all of the points. You can see on the screen all of the 10 types of benefits that we generally talk about when we're talking about what is it that MMC brings that there's an advantage. I think within these, there's 3 that are particularly important and relevant for housing associations and from an asset management point of view that I just want to alight on quickly. The first is on the top left-hand corner, the increased speed of construction. And the benefits that brings. Now here we talk about financial benefits, and that's typically something that you see build-to-rent providers, for instance, investors who are looking to recycle their investment very quickly. They see an awful lot of benefit in building more quickly, and obviously that's the case for affordable housing and for housing associations, not just for investment purposes, but because you have tenants to house and needs to meet, and the faster that homes are built, the faster that need can be met. I think linked to that, there's something that comes in terms of quality from being able to build more quickly. So the faster that homes are built, either in a volumetric sense, so entirely in a factory, away from the elements, or even some of the other systems. So framing systems in the bottom left-hand side of this, we're talking about achieving a fast weather-tight envelope. The faster that the building is weather-tight, the better the control you have over quality, the better final product you're likely to have. And we're seeing now some Category 2 framing manufacturers starting to work towards getting wind and weather-tight within 24 hours on site. So these are the sorts of things that will be beneficial to long-term asset performance, simply through the quality and speed of the build. And then top right-hand corner, just to pick out a third one, the MMC has the potential to generate significant benefits in terms of carbon and sustainability. So the whole system of building using MMC uses fewer materials because there's less waste through the manufacturing process, because materials are better managed and used in a factory. There's fewer transport journeys compared to traditional construction, which results in better air quality. And there are you generate better performing homes, and I'll come back to this later in the presentation with a case study, but better performing homes in terms of energy performance, which is better for asset owners, but also better for tenants, and helps alleviate issues such as fuel poverty and those sorts of issues. So 3 out of 10 there, there's 10 there which are all useful in building a business case for MMC, but 3 that I think particularly relevant from an asset management point of view. But at the same time, there are still challenges in the sector, and I think it's important to pick them out and deal with them rather than pretend that they're not there. We're always very keen to recognise that MMC is actually, it's been around for a long time, and prefab's been around for a long time, but in its current evolution and the way we're seeing modern factories starting to develop, it's still a reasonably new and therefore quite immature sector compared to traditional construction. And that means that there are naturally issues that need to be addressed and that will evolve over time. Again, there's 10 on the screen, and you'll be able to read them in your own time. But 3 that I think are relevant for housing associations and for this conversation we're having today. One is around number 2 on the screen, the lack of supply side collaboration and aggregation. I think there's, as long as buyers of MMC homes work on their own, you generally find that you have pilot projects and prototyping exercises, but they don't they don't turn into scale. Scale is required for investment, which improves product and performance. And so collaboration is key. Trina will know about this from her background in building better, but aggregations of demands that enable bigger purchasing to happen from the sector will enable growth and improvement in performance. Number 7, it's definitely still the case that building regs, warranty market are catching up with where MMC is and where it might be in the future. I think we've seen some real positive movements in this regard. So it's not, it's not a massive failing. It's certainly not something that's not being dealt with. I mean, for instance, in the past few months, NHBC has released NHBC Accepts, which is a specialist approval system for MMC systems. But at the same time, I think it's worth picking out the fact that it does need to be thought about, and is still an emerging part of the market around organising regulation and warranty for MMC products, which needs to be dealt with. And again, an argument in favour of collaborating and learning from other people who've been through the journey already. And number 9 on here, the lack of system interoperability. It's a really important point. For purchases of MMC homes, you might be concerned about supplier failure risks and what happens if you buy a system that no one else can complete. This is an issue. I mean, systems still aren't particularly interoperable, and it's something that hopefully will be driven in the future the greater the uptake is. Again, I think you're seeing new entrants into the market that are particularly well capitalised. Think of Legal and General Homes, for instance, would help manage some of those supplier risks. But again, these are arguments in favour of collaboration and sharing risk and pooling demand with collaborations like the ones I've mentioned before. So that as a backdrop is kind of what MMC is, where it is, in terms of strengths and still the barriers that exist. The second thing I want to pick up on is what's driving its use now, and how far might that be driven? What are the issues and drivers that are out there that are making MMC be increasingly picked up? Some of these are particularly relevant to housing associations, so I'll touch on those in particular as we go through. The first thing is around starting to see why developers are picking up on MMC. So this is a survey we did a couple of years ago for NHBC, and we asked people who are commissioners of MMC homes why they had chosen to commission MMC homes, and the standout answer here was because they were seeking better quality than they could achieve otherwise. So this is starting to show, people that are engaging with MMC, that they're looking towards it for a better solution than the solutions they're able to get from the market anyway. So this kind of backs up some of those points I was trying to pick out before. Now, obviously, there's strengths and weaknesses with any system, and this is an emerging system as well. So not everything will be perfect, but the general sense that MMC is a solution that will drive better quality, and obviously, therefore, important in terms of long-term asset ownership and management. I think it's interesting to see that actually some of the contracting sector, probably the more forward-thinking contracting companies, some of them I've listed on the screen here, are starting to engage with MMC themselves. I think this means that you may come into contact with MMC on schemes even if you haven't specifically specified that it will be a modular scheme. Say, if certain contractors, as they evolve their production facilities and their strategies, will be using MMC themselves anyway, because they see the efficiency benefits, the quality benefits, the productivity benefits, which will for them be growth enablers for their business. And just to pick one of these three, I think really interesting to see what Laing O'Rourke are doing, a major national and international infrastructure and construction company, with their 70-60-30 strategy, which whether in their terms, 70-60-30 means a 70% off-site production at the end of the strategy they're trying to implement here, through which they want to achieve a 60% improvement in productivity and 30% faster building. So if organizations and companies as big as this are seeing these benefits, I think that's a good good evidence that there's something here, and people are starting to move towards this as an approach to modernisation. It's important to think about COVID, and actually what we're finding is that COVID is starting to become a bit of a driver for MMC as well. So what we found from COVID is interesting, that site productivity actually fell, as you might expect, because of social distancing, physical distancing. You can't get the same number of people onto sites. You can't, they can't operate teams on sites in the same kind of way. We found that most sites actually kind of kept going, but productivity on a site basis was down. Though actually there's quite a lot of anecdotal evidence that individually operatives on sites were more productive. They were more spaced out. They weren't kind of falling over each other in the way that trades tend to do, and that there was some benefit there in the sort of streamlining and reduction of labour on site at an individual level, but not an overall level, which points to some of the benefits and efficiency benefits you can see in factory-based construction, where workers are organised in a way that is slightly different. So that's an interesting finding that we found. We expect overall that there's going to be tender price deflation over the next 12 months, but it's really hard to judge exactly where the market's going to go with the extent to how long COVID restrictions run for and the effect of Brexit. It's very hard to judge. But what we are expecting to see and starting to see is that these COVID pressures, particularly physical distancing measures which do reduce overall site productivity, they really are starting to drive an incentive for contractors to increase the pre-manufactured content of their buildings. So the more that can be done away from site in controlled conditions, the easier it is to maintain productivity. So I think that in that sense, actually, COVID is going to be a bit of a driver for pre-manufacture and MMC. And to back that up, you can see that the comment at the bottom there, that since the COVID outbreak, the Construction Leadership Council is now actively promoting manufacturing housing as one of the measures to renew the construction industry after COVID. So this is starting to be picked up as an industry-wide driver of change. Just to think about what that might all mean in terms of where the sector is going to get to. There's quite a lot of information on this slide, so I'll try to explain it as I go through. You start over on the left-hand side. Number one, this is today. So this is research that we've done recently on how many homes were built using MMC last year, actually. And our finding is that it's less than 3,500, probably about 3,300 homes last year were built using volumetric modular manufacturing techniques, and probably about 40,000 had some form of panelized system, including timber framing, which is a reasonably standard system. You'll know, been around for a very long time. Our research and our understanding of where the market's going suggests that over 10 years, you might expect to see that total output of 43,000 homes double. And we might get to a very significant increase in MMC house building over the next 10 years, given those factors I've just explained. And if I take you to the chart on the right-hand side, it shows how there's still significant potential for even that to increase. So if we take the 2019 figures, which is today on the right-hand side of this chart, the black box is the homes that were built using MMC, and the red box are the homes that were built traditionally. If we assume that this country achieves its housing ambition of 300,000 homes a year in a decade's time, there's still significant scope for traditional house building to increase. That's the number 3 there on that chart, and still for MMC to double in a decade. So there's significant growth potential for MMC even before it starts to eat away at what might be delivered traditionally. And I think we would recognise actually that the traditional house building sector is not likely to increase significantly over that time because it's not historically done that. So there's possibly even greater potential for MMC to grow. And again, to back that up, some factors that are probably quite relevant for you. In the last few months, we've seen the announcement from Homes England that its strategic partners will be required to deliver 25% of their programs using MMC of some form. An estimate from us is that could be worth about 18,500 MMC homes over the coming 4 years, and it will probably mean that organisations that haven't traditionally engaged with MMC, certainly not at scale, that sort of 25% of program level scale, will now need to be engaging with the construction methodology and working how to adopt it and integrate it into their existing strategies. This will be a significant driver of demand and exactly the sort of impetus that the sector needs to be able to continue to fund its investment and growth. And to pick up on a more recent announcement, this is a policy paper released by Mike Diath and Mark Farmer, who's Chief Executive of CAST and also the government's MMC advisor, a couple of weeks ago, talking about the steps that could be made towards really driving on MMC in the UK. And that saw even greater potential than I showed on the screen before, to almost 2.5 times the volumetric modular output, up to 75,000 homes of volumetric output in 10 years. And again, that to support that would be the need for housing associations and others to aggregate their demand, but also a series of recommendations for government. And I saw in the Times yesterday morning, Robert Jenrick with that quote at the bottom there, verifying that a significant part of their future housing investment plans will be based on MMC. So we wait to see exactly what that means, but these sorts of messages are being picked up in government, and they're going to increase the need for people to engage with and understand and work with MMC. And the final part of my presentation, I just wanted to very quickly pick up on 3 specific elements of MMC, examples of MMC that relate to asset management, just to bring it back to the focus of today's session. And the first is around that issue around cost, capital expenditure, and long-term asset performance and viability. So this is to pick up a bit more detail around the issue of speed and performance for MMC. So there is a perception that MMC is more expensive, and when you apply factory overheads and other potential hidden costs like transport to the materials that are brought to site, there can be some price increases compared to traditional construction. There's certainly perception of that. That's not always the case. It's certainly not the case on a per se basis, and developments that are built with MMC in mind from the start, it should see no particular differential in price. But the bigger point, I think, is it misses some of the other aspects of the appraisal that need to be brought into consideration. So that's taking a capital expenditure point of view from the start. But a particular benefit to, I should imagine, housing associations, because of your financing and your need to invest and keep your investment rolling, is speed. And to try to set out exactly what I mean by that. So here I've tried to show how a traditional construction program would vary from an MMC construction program. The left-hand side, the red bar is the design activity that takes place for an MMC project, and then the black blob is the delivery activity that relates to that. On the grey long line is the design activity for traditional construction, and the orange blob is the traditional construction delivery process. And the difference here is that the design aspect happens a lot sooner with MMC. It's all done pretty much before anything goes into manufacture, which can be a challenge for clients, because you have to be ready to work with that and to make decisions sooner. But what it also means is that when you go into production, things happen a lot faster. Whereas in traditional construction, design, as we know, carries on through the development process for a much longer period. What this all ends up delivering is a significant time saving on traditional, on offsite compared to traditional, which is the line at the bottom right hand side. And I thought I'd pick a case study to try to exemplify that. I've gone for the biggest case study I could find. This is George Street in Croydon. It's the world's largest modular tower, but it does really sort of reiterate the point here. So this is a 44-story modular tower that was completed in 26 months by Vision Modular and Tide Construction on behalf of Greystar. So completed in 26 months, and probably would have taken 48 months for a traditional build to take that to achieve the same sort of development. So a saving of nearly 50% in terms of time saving, and generally we see a third to a half as the time saving that can be achieved. That means the investment is repaid sooner, can be used somewhere else sooner, and that all improves viability modelling and appraisal. The second part I wanted to pick up on is around regulation relating to asset management and ownership, and how MMC plays into that. So first point is around building safety reform, building regulation reform in that regard, and the creation of duty holders responsible for creating, maintaining a golden thread of building information. And the golden thread will be held digitally and ensure that the original design intent and changes are captured, preserved, and used to support safety improvements. Now, this is not an argument for MMC per se, but it is certainly the case that homes that are designed digitally using a BIM approach from the start are then manufactured digitally and then delivered on site are better placed to enable a digital thread. They start from a stronger starting point than developments that don't happen in that way. So it's another enabling factor for MMC. Similarly, Future Home Standard aiming to achieve 75 to 80% carbon reductions by 2025. It's very hard to see that sort of step change being achieved through traditional construction alone. The tolerances that and quality that's achievable in a factory setting along with all the other benefits that I mentioned around waste, are more likely to help towards achieving those sorts of standards. And we are starting to see quite a lot of interest in MMC as part of a solution towards zero carbon. And I wanted to give another example of that. So this is Goldsmith Street in Norwich, which won the Sterling Prize earlier this year. It's talked about as a great social housing and affordable housing scheme. It's not often talked about as an MMC scheme, but it is in fact an MMC scheme. It's got a timber panelized frame system built by Signum in Ireland as part of a wider package of traditional construction. So to some extent, this shows how you can have an MMC solution, but as part of a more traditional approach, certainly as part of a more flexible approach than modular volumetric modular housing. So that design flexibility enabled the scheme to be beautiful, in inverted commas, enough to win a Sterling Prize, but also to achieve passive house energy standards. And so what I'm trying to say here is that there are ways to use MMC to achieve these sorts of things that aren't always about volumetric modular in the way that might be obvious at the start. And the final thing I wanted to pick up on is this really interesting case study that was done between Magna and Southwest Procurement Association, looking at long-term asset performance with different types of manufactured housing and manufactured housing against traditional housing. Now they used real cost data for MMC homes with some assumptions about long-term performance, and I think this is searchable. You can find this on the internet. If you look for it, you can see the case study that sits behind it. This is the first example we've got of really, I think, of really accessible, good data showing how over a 30-year business plan, because of the quality benefits inherent in the build and the fit out of a MMC scheme, the reduction in R&M cyclical costs that come with that outweigh any initial increase in capital costs associated with MMC delivery. So that creates a 30-year business plan benefit because of quality and taking a different view about procurement. This is kind of leading up into what Robert's going to talk about, I think, but basically trying to make the case here that to be getting into MMC well and to be procuring it well, you need to be thinking about long-term costs as well as upfront costs. You need to be thinking about how do you procure it in slightly different ways, maybe to recognise that. How do you recognise benefits like faster return on investment, better environmental performance, or better asset performance? So just to conclude, my key points that I wanted to get across, which is that MMC covers a wide range of solutions, not all of which are modular, and sometimes you may not even notice that the off-site and modern elements of a build project. It's going to grow significantly in the next decade. Our estimates are that it might double, and with some of the issues and drivers that I've picked up on there, it may be even greater than that. And picking up on those three specific areas in which MMC can drive improvements to long-term asset management business planning. Faster completion equals faster income, which means lower cost on borrowing and better speed of recycling your investments. Higher quality build equals lower running costs. That's better for residents and for any ongoing costs that are in the long-term business plan. And it also means maintenance costs are likely to be lower. And there is that example there of how Magna have started to really put numbers to that. Or for all three of those reasons, there are good reasons to look at whether MMC can drive long-term business plan benefits to an asset management plan. And with that, I'll hand over to Robert for his presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. So my name is Rob Peck, Director of Procurement Services, Procurement for Housing. We provide a range of procurement and consultancy services, and we're delighted to be appointed as procurement partners for Building Better, where we are aiming to deliver a range of procurement solutions that will hopefully make MMC more of a mainstream option for construction moving forwards. So I guess in terms of my presentation today, I'd like to really cover off a quick view in terms of MMC in the housing sector and what that looks like to date, and then also just highlight some of the manufacturer feedback that we've had through our dialogue to outline what the current framework landscape looks like for MMC and some of the challenges there. And then really move into what our approach will look like and the desired outcomes that we're hoping to achieve through this procurement exercise. But just to start off then, in terms of the current MMC landscape within social housing, I think it's fair to say that there probably never been more energy, positivity and interest in the role that off-site manufacture can play in solving the UK's housing shortage and also in stimulating the economy both during and post the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Jeff alluded to, we're certainly getting feedback to suggest that the pandemic could well prove to be a catalyst for MMC due to increased safety with regards to production in a controlled and safe manufacturing environment and reduced labour on site. However, despite the optimism and the significant strides that have been taken over the past years, we're still not quite at a point whereby the sector has what we've classed as an MMC first mentality to construction. And there's a number of reasons for that. MMC is still treated with a degree of scepticism by many across the housing sector, which then leads to highly fragmented demand profiles, with multiple examples of organisations almost dipping the toes in the water with smaller scale pilot projects and high levels of design customisation. And this severely impacts the manufacturer's ability to deliver maximum benefit in terms of unit price, speed to site, and so on. So essentially what we've got is a demand profile which doesn't really fit with a manufactured product. Off-site manufacture also presents a different risk profile to landlords that they may not be used to. The payment profile is different to traditional construction, with significant payments required during the manufacturing process, and circa 70 to 80% of the contract sum payable before the modules are even delivered to site. Off-site manufacture also remains an emerging market in many cases. There's an influx of startup organisations bringing new solutions, new innovative design, but with it a higher degree of risk potentially. There also remain question marks regarding product quality and whether MMC solutions will stand the test of time in the way that more traditional methods of construction have done. And we've had ongoing challenges regarding mortgageability, warranties, and accreditations. And ultimately, in many cases, we have to accept it's not traditional construction. The housing sector is familiar and comfortable with traditional construction methods. Our people are skilled and experienced, and the reality is that often it's far easier to stick to what you know and remain in that comfort zone. Now, before I move on, I should balance the points that I've just stated there. You know, we are beginning to see a shift. There are now examples of social landlords committing to larger scale MMC development programs. In August, it was announced that a memorandum of understanding had been signed by warranty providers to introduce minimum standards for assessing MMC homes, which in turn provides lenders and insurers with assurance over product quality, and perceptions are changing regarding MMC quality, performance, defects, and so on. So things are most definitely headed in the right direction. Okay, so what does the current landscape look like for MMC frameworks? So as part of our dialogue and pre-market engagement with manufacturers, we've had feedback to suggest that many frameworks out in the market at present are speculative in nature, like any form of real volume commitment, and in the majority of cases have often delivered a fraction of the advertised potential demand, and in some cases nothing at all. Feedback also suggests a degree of frustration for manufacturers with the procurement process itself, with many procurement projects often utilising an approach and documentation more aligned to traditional construction practices, and it's felt that they don't demonstrate a full understanding of the off-site construction environment. The result is often then that you get a procurement exercise which can fail to extract maximum benefit that MMC has to offer through a series of misaligned demands or requirements that may be set out within the tender documentation. A further challenge exists at point of call-off as well. So typically frameworks have a significant number of manufacturers that have been appointed, and landlords then are often required to run mini competitions or further competitions to make an award. Now, whilst there's nothing wrong with that approach and that call-off procedure, the reality is that it's another barrier, it's another hurdle, and it adds further time and complexity into a process that could be streamlined to allow earlier manufacturer involvement, given the right framework structure and environment. The feedback we received also suggested that MMC frameworks are often all frame and no work. And we feel that this really kind of encapsulates the feeling of frustration conveyed by many manufacturers. You've got efficient demand forecasting, you have a focus on small scale sites, a lack of standardization, and it's really created an environment where many manufacturers are feeding back to us to suggest that they are unable to achieve the maximum scale efficiencies. And this has played a real significant role in our thinking in terms of how to design the framework and how to design the procurement process to extract maximum value. So we've been really clear from the outset that we wanted to procure a demand-led solution with a volume commitment that really has manufacturers at the heart. Okay, so where did we start? So in terms of the process we've been through, we've undertaken scoping sessions with manufacturers and with members of Building Better to understand the range of organisational drivers, ambitions and appetite towards MMC. And as you can see from the slide on the screen, there are the multiple factors and elements that were surfaced during these sessions and that require consideration through the procurement process. As a group, we have clarity in relation to the headline objectives. We know that we want to push the boundaries and tick multiple boxes. And we know that we want to do a lot of heavy lifting at the procurement stage in order to accelerate and simplify the call-off process for the end user and for the manufacturer. Our minimum requirements have been defined, and we've been able to develop a red line document that captures a series of pass-fail elements aligned with our values and objectives. However, at the same time, there are a number of aspects where we feel dialogue with manufacturers will be hugely beneficial in terms of helping us test, refine, and shape our final requirements into a format that's understood by all parties and that draws on the expertise and insight that the market has to offer. We've been really clear that in order to extract maximum value from this framework, it has to work and be attractive for manufacturers. So in light of the fact that there are elements that we wish to discuss with bidders as part of the procurement process, we felt that the greater flexibility offered by the competitive dialogue route made it the most appropriate procurement route for us instead of the more traditionally used open and restricted processes. But some of the key reasons behind that, flexibility is absolutely key. Competitive dialogue is really well suited to procurement solutions where the contracting authority has a broad outline of what needs to be delivered, but would benefit from shaping the specific details in collaboration with the market. We were also mindful that we're working with an emerging and continually evolving market with a variety of solutions, a variety of approaches, innovations, and so on. And we wanted to listen and learn as part of this process. It's essential that we understand what the market has to offer and understand from a supplier perspective how we can extract maximum benefit. from a cost, time, environmental impact perspective. There's also a need to develop our requirements as part of this process. So as previously mentioned, we've got clearly defined red lines, aspirational targets that articulate our headline requirements. However, the specific final requirements may have not been fully established in every single area. And through structured dialogue with shortlisted bidders, it provides us with the opportunity to explore and refine our requirements prior to issuing the final invitation to tender. And ultimately, as per the slide there, we want to break the mould of dictating every single element of what we want through countless tender documents and quite a rigid procurement pathway. We may not have all the answers at the very outset, and we feel that this approach is more inclusive and places greater emphasis on having manufacturers at the heart of the process, rather than a more familiar approach of, this is what we want, tell us how you'll deliver it. And in terms of desired outcomes then, so we're underway with the procurement process at this point in time. And the intent is that we will develop framework solutions initially for volumetric systems, and then moving on to panelized solutions later in the year, that will ultimately support the shift in positioning MMC as a mainstream solution for the development of new homes. We aim to push the boundaries of design standards with innovative, future-proofed solutions, and we aim to achieve the highest environmental and sustainability standards with homes that are cheaper to run and also cheaper to maintain. We're seeking to appoint innovative, high-quality manufacturers aligned with Building Better's values of collaborative working, desire to jointly solve problems, and a commitment to exploit innovation and maximise customer satisfaction. Our intent is also to deliver a solution that provides price certainty and a mechanism for ongoing price reduction during the lifetime of the framework, along with a agreed menu of pricing for a variety of different customisation options. And we want to tackle a number of fundamental aspects such as payment terms, contract environment, product options, and price at a framework level to enable a quick and efficient call-off mechanism that enables manufacturers to be involved in projects as early as possible and mitigate the need for further competition. So we want to do as much of the heavy lifting during this procurement process as possible, rather than pass that downstream. We want bidders to provide. We want to provide bidders with visibility over volumes. We really want to try and move away from this current scenario where we have bespoke one-offs to actually a more collaborative approach where we have an aggregated pipeline position that manufacturers are eager to engage, and in doing so really begin to drive a step change in the benefit and the impact that MMC has to offer. And we want to drive the environmental agenda as well, and play a role in measuring the impacts that MMC has in reducing our carbon footprint. We also want to drive social value outcomes, both at a manufacturing level in the form of training, apprenticeships, and also at a local level, so on site through tailored social value initiatives that are bespoke to that individual community. Data also represents another key theme for us, and again, tied in with the housing data standards. We want consistent data outputs from our appointed manufacturers, so that we can understand product performance, defects, ongoing maintenance, and to assess the impact that MMC homes are having on the lives of our customers. We also want to use this data to support our chosen manufacturers with their ongoing product development roadmap. So it's very much a collaborative approach, whereby sharing data and insight, we may be able to influence the next generation of MMC solutions. And ultimately, we want a flexible solution that empowers members to contract with MMC providers in a fashion that best suits their needs, whether that be supply only or full turnkey solution. So that brings my section's presentation to a close. As I say, we anticipate that our first framework for modular solutions will be available in the spring of next year, with a further framework for panelised solutions probably landing around the summer of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for two very informative and also it felt like very well balanced presentations. I think neither of you shied away from talking about the challenges, which are really important for us to be considering. And even then, even though I'm in the business of trying to encourage housing associations to do more of this, I'm really struck by the sheer scale of the opportunity and how exciting it is. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to just ask both of you one question, and it's the same question, but I'm going to tailor it a little bit. The question is broadly, what advice or tips would you give to housing associations wanting to go down this route? And I think just to personalize it, Jeff, you talked very helpfully at the beginning of your presentation about, you focus specifically on asset managers and the asset management function. So if you could pull out maybe a couple of tools or resources that our colleagues could make to the wider business to help make that business case. And Rob, you're very much in the doing right now. You're sort of learning as you go along. So any tips that you've picked up through the process of the last couple of months? If I could go to you first, please, Jeff.
Sure, yes, of course. So I think in my presentation, I highlighted the Magna work with LHC and the other procurement bodies. I think that's a really good starting point. I imagine housing associations will have their own ways of building business cases and different evidence bases, but that's a really good starting point there for looking at long-term modelling of asset performance. But again, that's just one part of how you might build a business case around it. And I think more broadly, and I picked up the point during the presentation, I think it's really important to learn from others and to seek out learning from where people have been through this already. Obviously, you'll know from Building Better, there's a collaboration there of organisations that are either starting their journey or have some of those pilot projects that Robert mentioned under their belts, and learn from those and be willing to engage with those organisations. And I think a bigger business case, and I would say this, but a bigger business case would look at, I think, those 10 factors that I tried to show at the start. I think if you were to organise your thinking around those 10, I think there's something in each of those 10 that can be specific to housing associations. But in there, the quality, the speed, the ability to hit carbon targets, I think they're all particularly relevant for housing associations.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeff. And if I can come on to you, Rob.
Okay, I guess from a procurement perspective, then I think the big thing for me, and certainly this is echoed through the conversations we've had with the manufacturers, is that MMC isn't traditional construction. So to approach it with that kind of mindset and trying to perhaps adapt documentation and approach that's been used for traditional construction, I think that's the wrong way to go about this. And so you have to come at this from a different angle. So the first thing is, obviously, you need time to do that. You can't just jump straight into this. You need to think about, from a manufacturer perspective, in order to extract maximum benefit, how does this need to work? So, effectively, in many cases, we've got a controlled factory production environment. So you think about any production line, it's about visibility of demand, it's about standardization of demand. And that really is how we have to think about this. I think also we perhaps need to recognize that the approach that I alluded to around just chucking a tender out to market and then expecting everybody else to fall in line, again, there is a degree of frustration within that manufacturing sector at the moment. So I think it's really important to have that upfront market engagement, really listen to things that have worked elsewhere, where the frustrations are, where those limiting factors are that are preventing these providers from really achieving the scale benefits that they know are there, and then doing something about it. So again, through the work that we're doing with Building Better, we recognise that there's a requirement on us as ultimately the end customer to give visibility of volume, to really ask organisations to make some firm decisions, perhaps to have a slightly different risk appetite. And it's that kind of change that I think is essential in driving momentum with MMC.
Thanks. So some common themes there in terms of sharing the learnings and maybe sharing some of the risk as well. So with that, I just want to thank you both very much, and thank you also to the delegates who have joined us to hear this on-demand session. A reminder about any questions, if you do have any after having listened to this, please send them through to michelle.telner@housing.org.uk, and there'll be a slide with her email address at the end. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.